I have told this story at a great many dinner tables, and I have never once got through it without some gray-haired listener setting down her fork to ask whether it could possibly be true. It is. I was there for the whole of it, from the first insolent word to the last, and I will swear to every part on whatever book you like to put under my hand. It begins with the Duke of Ashcombe telling a woman she could not win. You must understand what that meant, coming from him. In the 10 years I had been his friend, and I was very nearly the only friend he had, the rest being flatterers who mistook a full purse for a warm one. I had never seen Nathaniel Hale lose at anything he set his hand to. Cards, horses, the long game of buying up half the county acre by acre, while men who ought to have known better shook his hand and thanked him for it. He won them all, and he won them without appearing to try, which is a particular sort of cruelty, though he never meant it so. The county called him the Cold Duke, and the county was not wrong. Something had frozen in him years before I knew him, and whatever warmth had once lived behind that stern, handsome face had gone so deep underground that most people doubted it had ever been there. So when he stood in the long gallery at Ashcombe Court on the eve of Michaelmas, and said to Miss Cordelia Marsh, in a voice like the flat of a blade, "No one beats me, Miss Marsh, not in 10 years. You would do better to go home." I confess I expected the girl to go home. She did not go home. She had come, that autumn evening, on the most desperate errand a gentlewoman can be driven to, though she carried it as lightly as if she had strolled over to borrow a book. Her father, poor Mr. Marsh of Larkfield, was a kind and ruinous man, the sort who signs whatever is put before him with a smile and a flourish and never reads the small hand at the bottom. Over some 15 years he had mortgaged, borrowed, staked, and lost until nearly everything the Marshes had was owed to somebody, and by that autumn the greater part of the somebodies had been quietly bought out by one man. The Duke of Ashcombe held the note on Larkfield. In a fortnight he might, if he chose, put the family into the road, Mr. Marsh and Cordelia, and her small sister Bess, who was 9 years old and thought the whole business a great adventure, because Cordelia had taken pains that she should think so. Any other young woman in the 3 counties would have gone to Ashcombe Court to weep. Some had. The Duke was not moved by weeping. He had a settled opinion that tears were the last coin of people who had run out of arguments, and he was seldom persuaded to open his hand by the sight of them. Cordelia Marsh knew this. She had learnt a great deal in 21 years of watching her father charm people into lending him money, and the chief thing she had learnt was that a Marsh could not afford to beg, because a Marsh, once begging, would never be permitted to stop. So she did not beg. She waited until the eve of Michaelmas, when the Duke held his one great gathering of the year, and she walked into Ashcombe Court uninvited in a gown 3 seasons out of fashion, and she asked him for a game. I was standing not 4 feet off when she did it, so I heard every word. "Your Grace keeps a wager at Michaelmas," she said. "The whole county knows it. Whoever sits down against you and wins may name one boon, and you are bound in honor to grant it, at whatever hour they choose to ask. You have offered that wager for 10 years because no one has ever collected it. I have come to sit down against you." The gallery had gone very quiet. A duke's drawing-room is a well-trained animal. It knows when something is happening. Lady Isabel Vane, who had spent 2 seasons arranging herself at Ashcombe's elbow and considered the position all but hers, turned from the pianoforte with a smile that had a great many teeth in it. The Duke looked at Miss Marsh for a long moment. He had a way of looking at people as though he were pricing them, and it unsettled stronger nerves than a country missus ought to have been. "You know why the boon has never been collected," he said. "Because no one beats you, yes. You have just told me so. Then you understand that you will lose, and having lost, you will owe me a boon which I shall certainly collect. I do not offer the wager out of charity, Miss Marsh. I offer it because I always win it." "I understand the terms perfectly," she said. "I should be a poor sort of gambler's daughter if I did not." That drew a ripple through the room. A gambler's daughter, said aloud in that gallery by the girl herself. It was the sort of thing one did not say. She had said it plainly, the way you might mention the weather, and I saw one or two of the county matrons draw back their skirts as if from a draught. The Duke did not draw back. Something moved behind his eyes. I have thought about it a great deal since, and I believe it was the first flicker of interest he had felt in a 12-month. "And what will you stake against my boon?" he said, "since you have nothing?" "You are mistaken, your grace. I have exactly one thing. If I lose, you may put me into service in this house. I will scrub your floors and empty your grates, and I will not ask my father for a farthing, and you may keep the whole of my wage against what he owes you. A servant costs you nothing but her keep, and you will have got a gentlewoman for the price of a scullery maid. That is a very good bargain, and you are a man who likes a good bargain. Everyone says so." Now the room did not merely ripple, it stopped breathing altogether. Lady Isabel Vane's smile had frozen into something quite fixed. I looked at the Duke and saw, for the first time in years, that I could not tell what he would do. "That is monstrous," said one of the matrons faintly. "It is arithmetic," said Miss Marsh, without turning her head. "My father taught me a great deal of it, all of it too late." And then she looked back at the Duke and said the thing that decided the whole affair, though none of us knew it then. "You are afraid I will win." I have watched men insult the Duke of Ashcombe to his face and live to regret it before they had finished the sentence. I braced for the cold, flattening word he kept ready for such moments. It did not come. Instead, he did the most extraordinary thing. He laughed one short, disbelieving breath of a laugh, the sound of a door being tried that had been painted shut for years. "Sit down, Miss Marsh," said the cold Duke of Ashcombe. "Let us both find out." They played piquet. It is an old game and a hard one, a game of memory and nerve and small cruelties, in which a great deal of what you hold you must never show, and the winning of it lies as much in reading your opponent as in reading your cards. The Duke was a master of it. I had lost a comfortable sum to him at it over the years, and considered the losses a fair price for the education. I will not pretend I understood at the time everything I was watching, but I understood this. Within the first 2 hands the Duke stopped being amused. She played like nothing I had ever seen. Her father, whatever his other failings, had bred a card player the way another man breeds a hound, and she had the 2 gifts you cannot teach. She remembered everything, and she was not afraid. The Duke tried the little pressures that had broken better players. He raised the stake of a hand with a lifted brow. He let a silence run long. He discarded with a carelessness meant to make her doubt her own count. She met all of it with the same unhurried calm, and once I saw it, when he attempted a small deception with his discards. She looked up at him over her cards and smiled just faintly, to let him know she had seen it and was not going to say so. It was the smile of a woman who has caught a man's hand in her pocket and finds it more interesting than offensive. The gallery had filled. Word travels through a great house like fire through a stubble field, and by the third party there were 40 people standing where there had been 8, and Lady Isabel Vane had abandoned all pretense of the pianoforte and stood at the Duke's shoulder with her fan working like a bird's wing. I watched the Duke lose. I want to be exact about this, because it is the hinge on which everything else turns. He did not lose because she was lucky. The cards were kind to neither of them in any particular way. He lost because, somewhere in the middle of the second party, he began to want to know what she would do, and a man who wants to know what his opponent will do has already stopped attending to what he ought to do himself. He, who read everyone and gave away nothing, found himself leaning forward across the table trying to read her, and she gave away nothing at all, and in the reaching he left himself open. By the last hand it was very close, and the room knew it, and there was a stillness on that gallery of the kind you get in a church. She took the trick that decided it with the 7 of hearts. I remember the card. I have remembered it for years, and she laid it down without any flourish at all, and set her remaining cards face down on the green cloth and folded her hands. For a moment nobody in that great room made a sound. "I make it that I have won your grace," she said. "Unless I have miscounted, I do not think I have miscounted." The Duke of Ashcombe looked down at the table for a long time. When he lifted his head, his face had gone to a stillness I did not like, the stillness of a man holding something down, and I thought, now it comes, now he will find some way to unmake it, for I did not believe then that he had it in him to lose gracefully. I did not believe he knew how. I was wrong about him. It was the first of many times. "You have not miscounted," he said. His voice was perfectly even. "You have won. Name your boon, Miss Marsh, and I am bound to grant it." And the whole gallery leaned in, because everyone in it knew what she would say. She would say, "Forgive my father's debt." She would say, "Give me back Larkfield free and clear." It was the obvious thing, the only sane thing, the thing she had walked into that house through the front door in a Three Seasons gown to win. A duke's promise, made in honor before 40 witnesses, cannot be broken. She had beaten him fairly, and she had only to open her mouth and her family was saved, her sister's home secured, the whole grinding terror of the past 2 years lifted in a single sentence. She did not open her mouth to say it. She sat quite still with her hands folded, and she looked at the Duke of Ashcombe with an expression I could not name. I have spent years trying to name it, and she said, "Not yet." "I beg your pardon." "I have won a boon," she said, "redeemable at any hour I choose. Those are the terms of your wager. You have offered them for 10 years. I choose not to name it tonight. I shall name it when it suits me. Until then, your grace, you owe me one thing of my choosing, and you are bound in honor to grant it whenever I ask, a week from now, or a year, or 10. I find I would rather hold the debt than spend it. I have never, before or since, seen a room so wholly at a loss. It is one thing to beat the Duke of Ashcombe. It is another thing entirely to beat him and then decline to be paid. Half the gallery plainly thought her mad. The other half, the shrewder half, went very quiet, because they had begun to understand dimly what she had done, and I think I was among the first to understand it fully, and I remember the cold thrill of it going down my back. She had not won a favor. A favor spent is gone. She had won a hold over him. So long as the marker was uncollected, the Duke of Ashcombe, the man who owned half the county and owed nothing to anyone, owed something to Cordelia Marsh, and could not be rid of it, and could not force her to take it, and could not know, from one day to the next, when she would appear and name her price. She had made herself the one creditor he could not pay off. And for a man like Nathaniel Hale, whose whole armored life was built on owing nothing and needing nobody, that was not a small thing. That was very nearly everything. "You cannot mean to leave it open," he said, and I heard something in his voice I had not heard in 10 years of knowing him. I heard that she had reached him. "I mean exactly that." She rose and shook out the skirts of her unfashionable gown and inclined her head to him with a courtesy so correct it was nearly an impertinence. "You will find I am a patient creditor, your grace, rather more patient than you have been with my father. I bid you good evening. I can find my own way out. I came in without a footman, and I shall leave the same way." And she walked the length of that gallery, through 40 people who parted before her without in the least meaning to, and out into the September dark, and left the cold Duke of Ashcombe standing at his own card table with a debt he could not close. I looked at Nathaniel. He was watching the door she had gone through as though he expected it to explain itself. "Hugh," he said at last, very low so that only I could hear him, "who is she?" "Miss Marsh of Larkfield," I said. "You hold the mortgage on her house. You mean to turn her family into the road at the quarter-day. I should have thought you'd know the name." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, in a voice I could make nothing of, "I did not know the name until tonight." And that, though neither of us guessed it, was the whole trouble beginning. The quarter-day came and went. The Duke did not turn the Marshes into the road. He told no one why, least of all me, and when I asked him directly, for I was the one man permitted to ask him things directly, He gave me a look that would have stopped a cannonball and said only that he saw no profit in evicting a family whose daughter held a claim on him he had not yet discharged. It was arithmetic, he said, borrowing her word without appearing to know he had done it. An open account was best left where one could see it. I did not believe him, and I do not think he believed himself, but I let it lie. So the Marshes stayed at Larkfield, in the strange, suspended peace of people who have been reprieved without being pardoned, and the whole county settled in to watch what would happen, and what happened was nothing. A week passed, and she did not come to Ashcombe to name her boon. A month passed. The leaves came down, and the first frost silvered the park, and still the marker sat uncollected, and I watched, with a fascination I could not have explained, the effect of that silence on the Duke of Ashcombe. It worked on him like weather on stone, slowly, invisibly, and past all his power to stop it. He was a man who had organized his entire existence around the principle of owing nothing. Now he owed something to a girl who would not take it, and there was no bill he could pay, no ledger he could close, no gate he could shut against it. He could not buy his way free of her the way he had bought his way free of everyone else, because the one thing she wanted from him was the one thing she refused to name. He began, that autumn, to find reasons to be where she was. I do not think he admitted it to himself. A man does not at first. But the harvest fair fell in October, and the Duke of Ashcombe, who had not attended a village fair in living memory, attended the harvest fair. He stood among the apple sellers and the cider presses in his beautiful dark coat, looking as out of place as a raven at a wedding. And when I asked him what on earth he was doing there, he said he had an interest in the price of apples, which was such a transparent lie that I nearly laughed in his face. He had come because she was there. She was there with her small sister Bess, the two of them going up and down the stalls with a very few coins and a great deal of laughter, and I watched the cold Duke of Ashcombe watch them, and I saw something in his face I had given up expecting ever to see. She caught him at it, of course. She caught everything. She came across the trampled grass with Bess's hand in hers and stopped a careful distance off and said, "Your Grace, have you come to collect your rents in person? I did not think the fair fell within your holdings." "I have come for the apples," he said. "The apples are twopence the pound, and you have 1,000 trees of your own, but I would not for the world question a duke's arithmetic." Her eyes were bright with mischief. "Was there something you wished to ask me?" He knew what she meant. She meant, "Have you come to ask me to name my boon and be free of me?" And I saw him understand that she had seen straight through the apples to the real reason, and I saw him decide. I watched the decision cross his face, not to pretend. "I wish to ask," he said, "why you have not collected." "Ah," she considered him. Bess had let go her hand and gone to stare at a man selling gingerbread, and Cordelia let her go, and turned her whole attention on the Duke in a way that I think unnerved him more than any card had done. "Shall I tell you the truth, your Grace, or the polite thing?" "I find I have a great deal of the polite thing in my life," he said. "The truth, if you can spare it." "The truth is that the moment I collect, I am nothing to you again. Just now I am the woman who beat you and holds your marker, and you cannot ignore me, because you are an honorable man, and an honorable man cannot ignore a debt. That is a better thing to be in your eyes than a bankrupt's daughter you are permitting to keep her house out of charity. So I keep the marker. It is the only thing I own that you cannot take, and I find I am not in a hurry to spend it." She tilted her head. "You wanted the truth. There it is. Was it worth the walk?" He looked at her for a long moment, there in the mud and the apple smell and the noise of the fair, and I thought he would say something cold, because the cold thing was his armor and she had just put her hand clean through it. He did not say the cold thing. "You might have asked me for your father's debt," he said. "That first night, you had won it fairly, you had only to open your mouth." "I know. Any sensible person would have." "I know that too." "Then why?" "Because," said Cordelia Marsh, You would have paid it and been done with me, and gone back to being the coldest man in 3 counties, and I should have gone back to Larkfield to grow old mending my father's mistakes, and neither of us would ever have thought of the other again. And I found, your grace, I will be entirely honest since you asked me to be, I found that I did not wish to be done with you quite so quickly. You are the only person in this county who has ever spoken to me as though I might be his equal, even when you were telling me I would lose. I have not had a great deal of that. I decided to keep it a while longer, and the marker was how I kept it. There. Now you know the whole of it, and you may make what use of it you like, for I have given you a weapon and I know it. I have thought since that no woman ever did a braver thing than Cordelia Marsh did at that harvest fair, handing the cold Duke the plain truth of her heart as calmly as she might have handed him an apple, knowing he could crush it. She trusted him not to. That was the wager she was really playing, a far larger one than piquet, and she was staking everything on it. He did not crush it. No, he said slowly, nor I of you. That was all, 4 words, but I was standing near enough to see his face when he said them, and I tell you that the cold Duke of Ashcombe, who had not been warmed by anything in a decade, was warmed straight through by a bankrupt's daughter in a threadbare cloak, standing in the mud at a village fair, and neither of them said another word about it, and both of them knew. Bess came running back with a gingerbread man in her fist, having charmed it from the cellar for nothing, being a Marsh, and Cordelia gathered her up and made her curtsy to the Duke, which she did with gingerbread crumbs on her chin, and then the 2 of them went off into the crowd, and Nathaniel Hale stood and watched them out of sight and forgot entirely about the price of apples. Well, I said when I judged it safe to speak, that was. Not a word, Hugh, he said, not one word. I said not one word, but I smiled all the way home, which he pretended not to notice, and which annoyed him extremely, which pleased me very much. I should like to tell you that it was all smooth going from the harvest fair, that the ice broke, and the thing ran on to its happy end like a stream downhill. It did not. 2 people do not undo the habits of a lifetime in an autumn, and the Duke of Ashcombe had a great deal more to undo than most men, and there were others in the county who had their own designs, and did not mean to stand aside for a penniless girl with a card-player's nerve. Chief among these was Lady Isabel Vane. You will remember her at the pianoforte the night of the wager, with her smile full of teeth. Lady Isabel was handsome and well-born, and had for 2 years considered the position of Duchess of Ashcombe as good as settled upon herself, lacking only the tiresome formality of the Duke's proposal, which she confidently expected. She was not a stupid woman. She had seen, at that card table, exactly what I had seen, that something in Nathaniel had woken up, and she had understood, long before he did, that the danger was real. And Lady Isabel Vane was not a woman to let a bankrupt's daughter walk off with what she had spent 2 years arranging to have. She went to work with great skill. She did not attack Miss Marsh openly, that would have been vulgar, and she was never vulgar. She merely began, in drawing-rooms across the county, to be very kind about the Marshes, in the way that does far more damage than cruelty. She spoke, with soft regret, of poor Mr. Marsh's gambling, of how the daughter had learnt her cards at his knee, my dear, at his very knee, of how one could hardly blame the girl for using her one accomplishment to snare a duke, though of course a snare was a snare, however one dressed it. She wondered aloud, with beautiful concern, whether it was quite the thing for his grace to be seen at village fairs. She let it be understood, without ever once saying it, that Cordelia Marsh was a scheming adventuress who had cheated her way to a hold over an honest man and meant to trade it for a coronet. It was very well done. Within a month, half the county that had watched Cordelia win with astonished admiration had been gently turned to watch her with suspicion instead, and the story had grown a shape it had not had before. Not the brave girl who beat the cold Duke, but the sharper who trapped him. And the poison of it was that it was built all of true pieces. She had learnt cards from her father. She did hold a marker over the Duke. She was penniless, and he was not assembled into a lie. Cordelia knew what was being done to her. She was not a woman who missed things. And I watched, that winter, the toll it took, because a lie of that kind is very hard to fight. You cannot go about a county declaring I am not an adventuress. It only makes people more certain that you are. She held her head up and she went on as before, but she stopped coming to the village on market days, and she declined 2 invitations she would once have accepted, and I understood that she was withdrawing, not out of shame, but to spare the Duke, so that no one might say she had thrown herself in his way. The Duke, for his part, was slower to see it. Men are in these matters. He knew only that she had grown scarce, and it made him restless and short-tempered, and one evening in December, after Lady Isabel had spent a whole dinner being exquisitely kind about the Marshes in his hearing, he said to me abruptly when the guests had gone, "Hugh, do you think it true, what Lady Isabel hints, that she means to trade the marker for a match?" I set down my glass. "Do you want the truth or the polite thing? You seem to have caught the habit of asking." "The truth. God knows I get little enough of it in this house." "Then the truth is that you are a great fool," I said, "and I say it as the one man permitted to. That girl handed you her whole heart at a harvest fair 2 months ago, in plain words, with nothing to gain by it and everything to lose, and told you to your face she'd rather keep your regard than her family's fortune. A woman scheming for a coronet does not do that, Nathaniel. A woman scheming for a coronet cashes the marker the instant she has you soft, and names the boon marry me, and binds you before witnesses. She has done the exact opposite. She has held the marker a whole season and asked you for nothing, and that is precisely what is driving you out of your senses, though you are too proud to name it. Lady Isabel knows all this better than you do. That is why she is at such pains to make you doubt it." He was quiet a long while. The fire had burnt down and the room was full of that winter stillness that makes men honest. "I have not," he said at last, "trusted anyone since I was 25. There was a woman then, I need not tell you the whole of it, you may guess the shape. She was very fond of me, everyone assured me, and it turned out at the last that she was very fond of the dukedom, and when a nearer duke offered she took him, and told me when I asked her why, that she had never for a moment thought of me at all, only of the coronet, and was surprised I had not understood a business arrangement when I made one. I was young enough to have thought it was not a business arrangement. I have not made that mistake since. I made very sure never to make it again. I owed nothing, I needed no one, and no one could tell me at the last that they had never thought of me at all, because I gave them nothing of me to fail to think of." He looked into the dead fire. "You see the trouble, Hugh. I have spent 15 years making certain no one could do to me what she did. And now here is a woman who has beaten me, and holds a claim on me, and has every reason in the world to want the dukedom and none to want the man, and I find that I do not care. I find that I want her to want the man, and I do not know how to want that and be safe, because the two things cannot be done at once, and I have spent 15 years choosing safe." It was the longest and truest speech I ever heard him make. I have never repeated it until now, and I repeat it now only because both of them are long past minding, and because you cannot understand the end of this story without it. The cold Duke was not cold by nature. He had been frozen on purpose by his own hand, as a man builds a wall against a flood, and the wall had held so long that he had forgotten there was anything behind it, until a girl at a card table knocked once politely, and the whole thing began to come down. "Then unfreeze," I said. "That is my whole counsel, and you may have it for nothing. The girl is not the woman who jilted you. The proof is the marker she will not spend. Stop guarding the gate and go and find out. And if I am wrong about her, then you will be a man who was wrong about one woman, which is a thing that has survived by most of the men who ever lived. But I do not think you are wrong. And I think, Nathaniel, that you do not think so either. I think you are only frightened, which is a very different thing and a great deal more curable." He did not answer me, but the next morning he rode to Larkfield in the December cold for the first time. What passed at Larkfield that morning I had from Cordelia herself, years afterward, and I set it down as she gave it to me. He came to the door on his black horse and asked, not for Mr. Marsh, but for Miss Marsh, and was shown into the shabby little parlor where the fire was kept small to save the coal, and where Cordelia was mending, for she did all the mending now, there being no one else to do it. She rose, needle still in her hand, and they stood a moment looking at one another in that cold, poor room. The richest man in the county and the girl he might have turned into the road 3 months before. "You have grown scarce," he said. "I thought it best, because of what Lady Isabel says of you." So he had understood at least that much. "Because of what she says of you," Cordelia corrected him gently, "that you are made a fool of, that a sharper has got a hold on you. I would not have that said, your grace, on my account. You have been better to my family than you had any need to be, and I will not have you laughed at for it. It is a small enough thing to stay home. And the Duke of Ashcombe, I love this part, and I have never told it without a catch in my throat. The Duke of Ashcombe crossed that shabby little parlor and took the mending out of her hands and set it down and said, 'Cordelia, cash the marker.' She looked at him. 'I beg your pardon. Name your boon, now, whatever it is. If it is Larkfield free and clear, it is yours before I leave this room. If it is £10,000, you shall have it. If it is that I never trouble you again, I will go and you will never see me more. But I cannot go on with the thing open between us, because so long as it is open I do not know whether you keep it out of what I hope, or only out of policy, and I find I would rather know and be wretched than not know and be safe. So name it. Set the price. Let me pay you and be done, and let us both learn what is left when the debt is gone.' It was, you understand, exactly the wrong thing to say and exactly the right thing, both at once wrong, because he was still trying to close the account, still reaching for the ledger even as he threw himself on her mercy. Right, because underneath the words was the plain, terrified truth of a man who could not bear the suspense of not being sure he was loved, and would rather have it settled at any cost. And Cordelia, who read everything, read this too. She picked up her mending again, very calmly, and she said, "No, no, no, I will not cash it. Not today, and not because you are frightened and want the matter settled so you may know where you stand. That is not why one names a boon. Sit down, your grace, you are looming, and the chair by the fire does not bite." And when, to my eternal astonishment, when I heard it, he actually sat, she went on, threading her needle, "You want to pay me and be done. I understand why. You have paid your way clear of every entanglement in your life, and it has kept you very safe and very alone, and now here is one you cannot pay off, and it is unbearable to you, and you have ridden through the cold to make me take your money, so the unbearable part will stop. But I am not going to take your money, Nathaniel Hale, and I am not going to take Larkfield, and I am not going to release you either. I am going to hold the marker exactly as long as I please, and you are going to have to bear it, the not knowing, the being owed to, the not being able to buy your way free of one single person in the whole world. Because that, I think, is the thing you have never once done, and it is the thing you most need to learn, and I am, as it happens, the only person alive who can teach it to you, having beaten you fairly for the privilege." There was a silence in that cold room. "You are the most infuriating woman I have ever met," said the Duke of Ashcombe. "Yes," said Cordelia Marsh, "I expect I am. You had grown very accustomed to winning. It is good for you." And then, more softly, laying down the mending, "I will tell you one true thing, and then you must go, because it is not seemly for you to be here, and I will not give the county another stick to beat me with. The true thing is this. I do not hold the marker out of policy. I told you that at the fair, and I meant it. I hold it because it is the one thread between us, and I am not ready to cut it. When I am ready, when I know what I mean to ask, and when I know that you can bear to be asked it, I will come to Ashcombe and name my boon, and it will not be money, and it will not be land. It will be the truest thing I own. But you are not ready to hear it yet, because you are still trying to make it a business arrangement, and it is not one, and until you can see that it is not one, the marker stays where it is. Now go home, your grace, and Nathaniel stop being frightened. It does not suit you half so well as being kind, and you are, underneath all that frost, a very kind man. I have seen it. I saw it the night you lost and did not cheat me of it. Go home. He went home. He was quiet for a senate afterward and short with the servants, and once I found him standing at the long gallery window in the early dark, doing nothing at all, which was so unlike him that I grew alarmed and asked if he were ill. He said he was perfectly well. He said it in the voice of a man who has been handed a mirror he does not much like the look of and cannot, in honesty, set down. And then, gradually, over that winter, I watched the cold Duke of Ashcombe begin in small ways to thaw, not because she had melted him with tenderness, but because she had refused to let him buy his way out, and had held him, gently and immovably, in the one place he had spent his whole life avoiding, the place of owing something he could not pay, to someone he could not be sure of, and having to live there and bear it and be a man. It changed him. You cannot make a man learn a thing like that and have him come out the same. The winter was a hard one, and it gave the story its next turn, which I will tell quickly because it is the sort of thing the tellers of these tales dwell on too long, and I have always thought the truer drama lay in the parlor and the card-room, not on the ice. There was a great frost after Twelfth Night, and the mere below Larkfield froze thick, and the whole neighborhood went down to skate on it, as country people will, the quality and the cottagers all mixed together on the ice in the rare democracy of a hard freeze. Bess Marsh went too, of course. She was mad for the skating, and Cordelia could no more have kept her from it than kept the frost from coming. You will guess what happened, for it is the way of these things. Near the far bank, where a spring fed the mere and kept the ice thin, the child went through. I did not see it. I had it from a dozen people who did. She went through all at once, with a little cry, into water black and killing cold, and the crowd on the near bank stood frozen in a different way, the way people do, none of them near enough, none of them quick enough, the whole scene fixed for one endless breath into the shape of a tragedy about to be finished. And the Duke of Ashcombe went across the ice. He had been at the mere, he was often, that winter, wherever the marshes were, and had stopped pretending it was about apples, and he was nearest, and he did not stop to think, which for a man who had thought carefully about every action for 15 years was itself a kind of miracle. He went out across the thin ice at a dead run, and it cracked and gave under him as he went, and he threw himself down at the edge of the black hole where the child had gone under, and put his arm into that killing water up to the shoulder, and caught her by the hood of her cloak, by pure fortune and a long reach, and dragged her out onto the groaning ice. And then, because the ice would not bear them both, he did the only thing left and broke it deliberately, punching through toward the shallows. Hauling the child ahead of him through the shattering ice and the black water, until his feet found the mud, and he could stand and lift her clear and carry her, streaming and half-drowned and screaming, which was the sweetest sound any of us ever heard. For the drowned do not scream, up the bank to where Cordelia was already running down. He would not give the child up. I want that recorded. Cordelia came flying down the bank with her arms out for her sister, and the Duke of Ashcombe, soaked to the skin and gray with cold, would not for a moment let Bess go, carried her himself the whole way up to Larkfield, at a run, wrapped in his own coat, barking orders for hot water and blankets in a voice that had commanded a great deal but never before commanded anything that mattered so much. And it was he who sat by the fire with the child on his knee while the warmth came back into her. And he who did not leave, though he was near frozen himself, until she was pink and cross and demanding to know why everyone was making such a fuss, which is how you know a child is out of danger. And Cordelia stood in the doorway of that fire-lit room and watched the cold Duke of Ashcombe hold her sister and would not stop shaking, and I do not think she told me so, long after that she had known, until that moment past all doubting that she loved him. She had liked him and sparred with him and hoped of him, But it was watching him refuse to give up her sister, watching the ice water still dripping from his ruined coat as he coaxed a smile out of a 9-year-old, that she knew. He caught a fever from it, of course. A man does not go into a frozen mere in January and walk away untouched. He was ill a fortnight at Ashcombe, and it went hard with him for some days, and I sat up with him more than one night, and I will tell you a thing I have told very few people. In the worst of the fever, when he did not know me, he was not calling for his mother, nor for his lost first love, nor for any of the ghosts a man might be expected to call for. He was arguing. In his fever he was arguing with Cordelia Marsh, over and over, the same argument, name your price, let me pay you, and each time in the fever he seemed to hear her answer no, and each time the no eased him rather than troubled him, as though even out of his senses he had begun to find, in that one debt he could not close, not a torment but a strange deep comfort, the comfort of being, at last, held to something he could not buy his way out of. The frost was going out of him even as the fever burned. I have thought about that a great deal. And Cordelia came. Propriety be damned, and the county's tongues be damned. When the word reached Larkfield that the Duke was like to die of the chill he had taken saving Bess, Cordelia Marsh walked to Ashcombe Court in the snow and asked to sit with him, and I, being in charge of the sick room, and having by then formed my own firm opinions, let her in, and let the tongues say what they liked. She sat with him through the worst night, and it was her voice he quieted to at the last, and when the fever broke toward dawn and he opened his eyes and knew where he was, the first thing the Duke of Ashcombe saw in the grey light was Cordelia Marsh asleep in the chair by his bed with her hand fallen open on the coverlet beside his, not holding it. She had been too proper even in exhaustion to hold it, only near. He did not wake her. He lay still and looked at her hand lying open beside his for a long time, until the light came up. And then, very gently, so as not to disturb her, he moved his own hand the last inch and laid it in hers. That is the moment the frost went out of him for good. Not the ice, not the fever, that inch. By spring the whole affair stood at a strange pass, and the county did not know what to make of it, and neither, I think, did the two people chiefly concerned. Everyone now knew that the Duke of Ashcombe was in love with Miss Marsh. He had gone through the ice for her sister and taken a near-fatal fever for it, and she had come through the snow to sit at his bed, and these were not the acts of indifferent people, and even Lady Isabel Vane's soft poison could not quite explain them away, though she tried, oh, she tried, letting it be understood now that the girl had engineered the whole rescue, had let the child skate on thin ice on purpose to hook the Duke, which was so monstrous a suggestion that it did Lady Isabel more harm than good. And marked, I always thought, the turning of the county's sympathy back toward Cordelia. There are lies too large to swallow, and that was one. So everyone knew the Duke loved her, and everyone knew she held his marker still, uncashed into a second season now. And everyone waited for one of two things, for the Duke to propose or for the girl to finally name her boon. And neither happened all through the spring, and the not happening became its own kind of scandal, a slow, quiet one, and I confess even I grew impatient and said so more than once to a Duke who had recovered his health and lost, it seemed, his tongue. For here was the difficulty, and it was a real one, and it does the pair of them credit that they saw it when a lesser couple would have rushed past it into unhappiness. The Duke could not propose, not honorably. Do you see why she held his marker? If the Duke of Ashcombe went down on his knee to Cordelia Marsh while she held an uncashed claim on him, a claim he was bound in honor to grant whatever she asked, then he could never afterward be certain, and worse, she could never afterward be certain, that she had not simply cashed the marker in the largest possible way, that marry me had not been the boon collected, that the whole of it had not been, after all, exactly the business arrangement that had frozen his heart at 25. The marker, which had been the thread that drew them together, had become the wall that kept them apart. So long as it hung open between them, a proposal was poisoned before it was spoken. He understood this. It was, I think, The finest thing his newly thawed heart taught him. That because he loved her, he could not ask her while she held that power, because to do so would be to make her choice unfree. And he wanted more than he wanted her, which is the whole test of the thing. He wanted her choice to be free. And Cordelia could not cash the marker to clear the way, for the mere reason. If she came to Ashcombe and named her boon, "Release me from it, we are quits," the account is closed. She would be throwing away the one thing that had ever made her his equal, disarming herself entirely, and standing before him as exactly what Lady Isabel had always named her. A penniless girl with nothing, hoping a duke would stoop. She would have surrendered her whole, standing on the guess that he would then, unbound, choose her. It was a fearful risk, and she was too proud, rightly proud, to run it lightly. So there they were, the two of them, each unable to move for love of the other, each guarding the other's freedom at the cost of their own happiness, and the marker sitting between them like a drawn sword down the middle of a bed. It was, if you like, the cruelest possible working out of the thing she had done that first night. She had made herself unpayable so that he could not be rid of her, and now the very unpayableness stood between them and everything they wanted. It could have ended there. These things do, oftener than the storytellers admit, two people who love each other into a corner and cannot find the way out, and grow old apart out of an excess of honor. I have known it happen. It did not happen here, because Cordelia Marsh was cleverer than the corner. Michaelmas came round again. A full year, near enough to the day, since she had walked into the long gallery in her 3 Seasons gown and beaten the cold Duke at piquet and declined to be paid. The Duke held his gathering, as he did every year. He had not offered the wager since. He had quietly let it be known there would be no wager at Ashcombe Court, while a marker of his still stood uncollected, which the county took as the mark of an honorable man, and which I took, knowing him, as the mark of a man who could not have borne to sit down across a card table from anyone but her. The gallery was full. Lady Isabel Vane was there, in magnificent looks and magnificent temper, having by now understood that her 2 years' work had come to nothing and unable to stay away from the ruin of it. And I was there, at the Duke's elbow, where I had stood a year before, watching the door. She came in the same way she had come the first time, unannounced, without a footman, through the front door, as though she owned the place. But not in the 3 Seasons gown. She wore a gown I had never seen plain still, for she was still poor, but new-made and well-made, of a soft gray that became her wonderfully, and I learned afterward that she had made it herself, every stitch, and that she had made it for this. She had dressed for the naming of her boon. The gallery fell quiet the way it had fallen quiet a year before. She crossed to where the Duke stood, and the crowd parted before her as it had parted before, and she stopped the same careful distance off, and she said, in a clear voice that carried to every corner of that great room, "Your Grace, a year ago I won a boon of you, redeemable at any hour of my choosing. I have chosen my hour. I have come to name it." You could have heard a pin drop into a snowbank. The Duke had gone very still and very pale. I saw his hand close hard on the back of a chair. He knew, as I knew, as everyone in that room knew, that whatever she asked now, he was bound in honor before 100 witnesses to grant, and none of us, not one, could have said what she would ask. Larkfield, a fortune, her freedom, his hand. Every eye in the gallery was on her, and Lady Isabel Vane's fan had stopped dead in her hand. "Name it, then," said the Duke of Ashcombe, in a voice I had to strain to hear. "Whatever it is, I am bound, and I will keep my word." "Name it." And Cordelia Marsh looked at him across the little space of polished floor, and she did the bravest and cleverest thing I ever saw a human creature do. And this is why I have told this story 100 times and will tell it 100 more. She said, "My boon is a question, only a question. You are bound to answer it, and bound to answer it true. That is the boon I name, and the whole of it. One true answer before all these witnesses, from a man who is bound in honor and cannot lie." The Duke stared at her. So did the room. It was not what anyone had imagined. It was not money, nor land, nor marriage, nor freedom. It was a question. "Ask it," he said. "The question is this." And here her voice, which had been so steady, went for the first time a very little unsteady, and I loved her for it, because it showed the whole thing had cost her more than she let on. If I did not hold this marker, if I had never won it, if there were no debt between us and never had been, if I stood before you tonight only as Cordelia Marsh of Larkfield, a bankrupt's daughter with nothing in the world and no claim on you at all, would you wish to marry me? Not would you be willing, not would it be honorable, would you wish it for yourself, for the man and not the Duke, freely, wanting nothing back you had not freely given? That is my question, and my boon is your true answer, and you are bound before all this company to give it. Do you see what she had done? I did not see it fully until it was done, and then I could have wept at the cleverness and the courage of it. She had found the one way out of the corner. She could not cash the marker to clear the ground for him to ask. That would have disarmed her and shamed her. And he could not ask while she held the marker. That would have made her choice unfree. So she had spent the marker itself, its whole value, on this, on forcing him to say, bound and truthful and before 100 witnesses, whether he would choose her with no marker at all in his hand. She had used the last of her power to ask him what he would do if she had no power. She had made him answer as though she were nothing, and in the answering, if he answered as she prayed he would make her everything, and he would do it freely, because the marker, spent on a mere question, gave her no hold at all over what the answer might be. He might say no. That was the terror and the beauty of it. She had staked the whole of her only fortune on one true word from him, and left herself no way to compel the word she wanted. It was the most naked act of trust I have ever witnessed. It was piquet played for a heart, with every card laid face up on the green cloth. The Duke of Ashcombe understood it too. I watched him understand it. I watched the whole of it cross his face, the year of it, the ice and the fever and the inch his hand had moved across the coverlet, the harvest fair and the cold parlor, and the wall the marker had built between them. And I watched him understand that she had just, at the cost of everything she owned, torn that wall down herself and stood in the gap and asked him, defenseless, to answer. And the cold Duke of Ashcombe, who had not wept nor knelt nor asked anything of anyone in 15 years, crossed the little space of floor between them, and knelt down there, before the whole gathered county, on the polished boards of his own long gallery, and took her 2 hands in his. "You have asked me for one true answer," he said, and he did not trouble to lower his voice, "and by God you shall have it, and I thank you for the asking, for I have been a coward a year for want of the courage to say it unasked. Here is the truth, Cordelia, before all these people, bound and free at once. If you had never won the marker, if you had never sat down at my table, if there were no debt and no bargain and no claim of any kind between us, and you stood before me only as yourself, with nothing in your hands, I would wish to marry you more than I have ever wished for anything in my life. Not because it is honorable, not because I am bound, because you are the only person alive who has ever cared nothing for the dukedom and would not take it when I begged you to, and made me learn to be owed to, and went through the snow to sit at my bed, and taught a frozen man that there was a heart in him still to thaw, and I love you, Cordelia Marsh. The man loves you, not the Duke, freely, wanting nothing back but you. That is my true answer. I have given it. And now the marker is spent, and I owe you nothing, and we stand equal and free, and so I ask you of my own will with no claim on either side. Will you have me?" The gallery had stopped breathing entirely. Cordelia Marsh looked down at the Duke of Ashcombe kneeling before her with her hands in his, and the steadiness came back into her, and past all the tears standing in her eyes she began, helplessly, to smile, the same faint, knowing smile she had smiled across the card table a year before, when she caught his hand in the discards and found it more interesting than offensive. "You have answered true," she said. "The boon is granted, and I am satisfied, and the marker is spent. You owe me nothing in all the world. and then softly, so that half of them had to lean in to hear it, and the story went round the county in a dozen versions by morning, none of them so good as the true one. And yes, of course, I have wanted nothing else since a harvest fair a year ago when you came for the apples and could not lie about it, and I have only been waiting, you great frozen fool, for you to be warm enough to ask me freely. You are warm enough now. Yes, 100 times yes. Get up off the floor, Nathaniel. You will ruin your knees, and a duchess must think of these things. I do not clearly remember the next few minutes, because the gallery came apart into such a noise as Ashcombe Court had not heard in living memory, and I was pounding the Duke on the back and quite possibly weeping myself, being at that age no longer ashamed of it, and Bess Marsh, who had been smuggled in behind a curtain, and had watched the whole thing, having refused absolutely to be left at home, came flying out to fling her arms round the both of them at once. The only person who did not join the general joy was Lady Isabel Vane, who was observed to leave very early, and who married a marquis within the 12-month and was, I am told, tolerably content, a marquis being nearly a duke and requiring no card-playing whatever. They were married at the little church near Larkfield, not the great one at Ashcombe, because Cordelia wished it. She would begin as she meant to go on, she said, warm and small and true, and not stand up in a cathedral to be gaped at. Mr. Marsh gave her away and wept the whole time and lost nothing that day, for once in his life, the Duke having quietly settled the whole of the Larkfield debt, not as any boon or bargain, but simply as a wedding gift to his wife's father, unasked, which is the only proper way such a thing is ever done. Bess was there in a new dress and crumbs be hanged. And I stood up as the Duke's man, and when the parson asked was there any impediment, I very nearly said, only that it took the two of them a year and a frozen mere and my considerable patience to get here. But I held my tongue, being for once in my life the sensible one. I will end where these things ought to end, which is a little way past the wedding, in the ordinary days that come after, for it is the ordinary days that tell you whether the grand moments meant anything. I dined at Ashcombe Court a 12-month on, and after dinner the Duchess of Ashcombe, for so she was now, and wore it as easily as she had worn the threadbare gown, which is to say without once thinking about it, proposed a game of piquet and beat her husband soundly, and the Duke, who had once not lost in 10 years, laughed out loud when she took the last trick, laughed like a man to whom laughing had become a habit, and paid her the little stake, and kissed her hand across the green cloth. You know, I said to him later over the port, watching the two of them by the fire, where Bess was being taught some card trick that would certainly ruin her for polite society, you never did win that marker back. She spent it on a question. You paid the whole of it and got only an answer for your money. He looked at me as though I had said something remarkably foolish, which I suppose I had. Hugh, said the Duke of Ashcombe, I got the only thing I have ever won in my life that was worth the winning. She let me be beaten, and would not let me buy my way out of it, and held me to a debt I could not pay until I learned to want to be held. Every other victory of mine bought me a little more of being alone. Hers cost me everything I owned and left me. He stopped and looked across the room at his wife, who chose that moment to look up and catch him at it and smile, left me the least alone man in England. I did not win the marker back. I should think not. It was the best bargain I ever made, and I lost it fair, and I would lose it again tomorrow and the day after for the rest of my life. And do you know, he did, in a manner of speaking. For it became a thing between them, a private joke that outlasted the county's memory of how it began. Every Michaelmas, all the long years of their marriage, the Duchess of Ashcombe would come to her husband and gravely inform him that she had decided at last to name her boon, and he would set down whatever he held and give her his whole grave attention, this man who had once given no one anything, and she would name it, and it was never money, and it was never land. One year it was that he should teach Bess to ride the black horse. One year it was that he should dance the first 2 dances at the assembly, which he hated and did beautifully. One year, when they were both grown old and gray, and I was old and gray myself and dining there still, it was only that he should sit with her in the long gallery and say nothing at all for 1 whole hour, which he did, holding her hand, the two of them watching the light go down over the park they had crossed to reach each other, warm to the last. She held the marker over him, you understand, the whole of their lives. She never did quite spend it, and he never once in all those years wished to be free of the debt. That is the truest thing I know about the two of them, and I have known a great many true things in a long life. The coldest man in 3 counties was thawed, not by anyone who melted him, but by the one woman in the world who beat him fairly and then would not let him pay, who understood, before he did, that a man who has never in his life been unable to buy his way free of someone has never once in his life been loved. She made herself unpayable, and in doing it she made him, for the first and last and only time, a man who was owed to and needed and held. He would tell you, if he were here, that it was the best bargain he ever lost. I was there for the whole of it. I will swear to every word.